The air in our Pittsburgh row house carried the faint tang of steel and soot, a reminder of the mill that pulsed at the heart of our town. It was October 10th, 1990, our first wedding anniversary, and I, Laura Bennett, had spent the day scrubbing the linoleum floors and setting out a modest spread of roast chicken and mashed potatoes. The table was set with our best plates chipped but cherished, hoping to surprise James Carter, my husband of 1 year. He'd been working late shifts at the steel mill, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of long hours and molten metal. I expected him home weary but smiling, ready to toast our milestone with the bottle of cheap Merlot I'd splurged on. Instead, the front door swung open with a creak, and James stood there, drenched in sweat, his mill uniform streaked with grime. Behind him was a woman, her belly round with pregnancy, her eyes downcast. Her auburn hair fell limp strands over a faded coat, and she clutched a worn duffel bag. My heart stuttered. Laura James said, his voice low but firm. "This is Sarah Miller. Her husband, Tom Hayes, died in an explosion at the mill last month. He saved my life. It's our duty to take care of her now." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the dining table, the Merlot bottle cold under my palm. Sarah lifted her gaze, her green eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry to intrude," she murmured, her voice soft as a hymn. "I have nowhere else to go." My throat tightened. Tom Hayes. I'd heard the name in hushed tones at the mill's break room, a welder who'd shielded James when a furnace malfunction sent shrapnel flying. The story was heroic, tragic, and now apparently my burden. James set Sarah's bag down, his jaw set with a determination I'd once found comforting. "She'll stay with us," he said, not asking, but declaring. "It's the least we owe Tom." I wanted to protest, to ask why this stranger's grief was now my responsibility, but the weight of his words, duty, honor, pressed against my chest. I'd always trusted James, his steady hands and quiet promises. We'd married young, both 22, dreaming of a simple life built on love and hard work. How could I say no to the widow of the man who'd saved him? That night I cleared our bedroom for Sarah. The mattress springs groaned as I dragged them to the living room, where I made a bed on the sagging couch. The anniversary dinner sat untouched, the chicken congealing in its dish. James didn't notice. He was too busy settling Sarah, fetching her water, and promising her safety. I lay awake, the couch springs digging into my back, staring at the ceiling where shadows danced like ghosts. A seed of unease took root in my gut, whispering that this was no temporary act of charity. The next morning, Sarah sat at our kitchen table, her hands folded over her belly. "Thank you, Laura," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. "I don't know what I'd do without you both." James beamed at her, then turned to me. "Laura, can you make her some tea? She needs to stay calm for the baby." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and set the kettle on. The whistle of boiling water felt like a scream I couldn't release. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's presence grew heavier. I cooked her meals, washed her clothes, and ran errands while James worked double shifts. He'd come home, his eyes lingering on her with guilt and gratitude, while I faded into the background. One evening, as I scrubbed dishes, James leaned against the counter, his voice soft. "You're doing well, Laura. This is what family does." But it didn't feel like family. It felt like I was a servant in my own home. The mill was abuzz with talk of Tom's sacrifice, and Sarah played her part well, her soft smiles and tearful gratitude winning over coworkers and neighbors. I overheard them in the local diner, praising James's nobility and pitying Sarah's loss. "Poor thing, pregnant and alone," they'd say, their eyes sliding past me. I wanted to scream that I was losing too, my home, my husband, my anniversary, but I kept silent, clinging to the hope that this was temporary. One night, as I lay on the couch, my mind replayed James's words, our duty. Duty to whom? To Tom, whom I'd never met. To Sarah, who seemed to fit too easily into my life. My fingers traced the edge of a photo frame on the side table, a picture of James and me laughing under a shower of rice at our wedding. Laura felt like a stranger now, her smile naive. I closed my eyes, willing myself to hold on, to believe in James's heart. But the unease grew, a quiet storm brewing in my chest. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that Sarah's arrival would unravel everything I held dear. If you're feeling Laura's shock and want to dive deeper into her fight to reclaim her life, hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to join us on this journey of betrayal and rebirth. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Winter descended on Pittsburgh like a heavy blanket, the air thick with snow and the acrid smell of the steel mill. Our row house, once a cozy haven, felt like a cage. Sarah Miller had been with us for 3 months, her presence a constant weight on my shoulders. Laura Bennett had given up more than just our bedroom. I'd surrendered my peace, my dreams, and bit by bit, my husband, James Carter. The couch in the living room now, my permanent bed, creaked with every toss and turn, its worn fabric, a reminder of how far I'd fallen. Sarah's needs dominated our home. She craved specific foods, fresh trout, rare in winter, or organic apples from a market 50 miles away in Youngstown, Ohio. James never hesitated. "Laura, can you head to the market?" He'd say, his tone expectant, as if my time and comfort were secondary. One night, with snow piling against the windows and temperatures dipping to 10 below, Sarah mentioned a craving for trout soup. "It's for the baby," she said, her voice soft but insistent, her hand resting on her swollen belly. James turned to me, his eyes pleading. "It'd mean a lot, Laura. She's been through so much." I bundled up in my threadbare coat, the wind cutting through me as I drove the icy roads to Youngstown. The market was nearly empty, the fishmonger grumbling as he handed me the last trout. On the way back, my car skidded on black ice and I plunged into a ditch. My hands shook as I climbed out, the cold seeping into my bones. When I got home, my fingers were numb and the trout was half frozen. Sarah sipped the soup I made, offering a faint thank you, while James praised her resilience. My frostbitten hands went unnoticed. At the steel mill, where I worked as a quality control technician, a promotion to technical supervisor was announced, a role I'd trained for, studying late nights to master safety protocols and equipment diagnostics. My father, John Bennett, had been a lead engineer at the mill, and his innovations saved lives during a gas leak crisis in the 70s. I wanted to honor his legacy, to prove I was more than just James's wife. But when the promotion list was posted, James, now deputy section chief, gave Sarah the spot. "She needs stability," he said, avoiding my gaze. "You're strong, Laura. You'll get another chance." I stared at him, my heart sinking. Sarah, who couldn't read a blueprint or operate a control panel, was now my superior. Co-workers whispered behind my back, some pitying, others smirking. They'd say James is looking out for that poor widow, but their words stung like salt in a wound. I confronted James at home, my voice trembling with anger. That promotion was mine. I earned it. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Laura, Tom died saving me. We owe Sarah this. You're being selfish." Selfish. The word cut deeper than the winter cold. I thought back to our early days when James would bring me coffee during my late-night study sessions, his smile warm and proud. Now that warmth was reserved for Sarah. I began to doubt myself, wondering if I was the one in the wrong. Maybe this was what love demanded: sacrifice, endurance. I buried my resentment, telling myself it was temporary, that James would see me again. But the erosion continued. Sarah's requests grew bolder: new clothes, special teas, a better pillow for her back. Each demand pulled James further from me. He'd sit with her at night, listening to her stories of Tom, his face etched with guilt. I'd catch them laughing softly, and my chest would tighten, a mix of jealousy and betrayal I couldn't name. One evening, as I washed dishes, Sarah mentioned needing a new coat. "The baby feels every chill," she said, her voice a practiced tremble. James nodded, then turned to me. "Laura, can you pick one up tomorrow?" I wanted to scream, to ask when my needs would matter, but I nodded, my hands trembling in the soapy water. That night, alone on the couch, I traced my fingers over my father's old engineering manuals, their pages worn from his careful notes. He'd taught me to value hard work, to fight for what was right. But here I was, shrinking under the weight of James's duty and Sarah's demands. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks, and whispered a promise to myself: I wouldn't let them take everything. The mill's break room became a battleground of whispers. "Laura's too proud," some said. "She should be grateful for a husband like James." Others pitied Sarah, the tragic widow, while I became the villain in their story. I kept my head down, focusing on my work, but each day chipped away at my spirit. I remembered my father's words: "You're stronger than you know, Laura." I clung to them, but doubt crept in. Was I strong enough to survive this slow erosion of my life? Or would I lose myself completely before I found a way out? The Pittsburgh winter of 1991 was relentless, the steel mill's smokestacks spewing ash that mingled with the snow blanketing our town. Inside our row house, the air was thick with tension, the walls closing in, as Sarah Miller's presence consumed every corner of my life. Laura Bennett, had become a ghost in my home, relegated to the sagging living room couch while Sarah slept in my bed. James Carter, my husband, had grown distant, his once warm eyes now fixed on Sarah, heavy with a guilt I couldn't penetrate. I felt myself unraveling each day, my dreams slipping through my fingers like sand. At the mill, my role as a quality control technician demanded precision. Still, James reassigned me to the furnace room after I questioned Sarah's undeserved promotion to technical supervisor. The furnace room was a beast, roaring flames, grinding gears, and hot air scorched your lungs. It was the most dangerous section of the mill where one misstep could mean disaster. "You need to learn humility," James had said, his voice cold as he handed me the reassignment papers. I swallowed my anger, remembering my father, John Bennett, who'd worked these same floors, his steady hands guiding the mill through crises. I told myself I could endure, that I'd prove my worth. But the furnace room was unforgiving. One February night during a graveyard shift, a hydraulic press malfunctioned. The warning alarms blared too late. A steel beam snapped, crashing down like a guillotine. I tried to dive clear, but the beam pinned my leg, the pain exploding through me like 1,000 knives. I screamed, my voice lost in the chaos, as coworkers scrambled to free me. Blood pooled beneath me, and the world blurred. Hours later, I woke in a hospital bed. My right leg mangled, the doctor's words, a grim litany: multiple fractures, nerve damage, a long road to recovery if I walked again at all. James visited, his face pale, but his concern felt hollow. "You'll be okay, Laura," he said, his hand brushing mine briefly before he turned away. When the mill offered compensation, a modest sum to cover medical bills, he took it without consulting me. "Sarah needs it more," he told me later, his voice flat. "The baby's coming soon, and formula's expensive." I stared at him, the hospital room spinning. My injury, my pain, my future sacrificed for Sarah's child. The betrayal cut deeper than the beam ever could. Back home, I lay on the couch, my leg in a heavy cast, the painkillers barely dulling the ache. Sarah moved through the house with ease, her belly now a proud curve, her soft humming filling the air as she prepared for her baby. James doted on her, carrying groceries, adjusting her pillows, while I struggled to reach a glass of water. One night, I overheard them in the kitchen, Sarah's voice, low and sweet. "You're so good to me, James. Tom would be proud." James murmured something I couldn't catch, but the intimacy in his tone was a knife to my heart. Despair settled over me like a fog. I thought of my father, whose Purple Heart medal sat in a frame by the couch, a reminder of his courage. He'd taught me to fight, to stand tall, but I felt broken, worthless. The mill job I'd loved was replaced by Sarah, who couldn't even read a safety manual. My marriage was a sham, my body shattered. One night alone in the dark, I stared at the bottle of painkillers on the side table. My hands trembled as I poured them into my palm, the weight of my losses too heavy to bear. I swallowed them one by one, tears streaming down my face. As my vision faded, a warmth enveloped me, and a voice clear as a bell whispered, "You deserve another chance." The world went black. I don't know how long I drifted in that void, but the voice lingered, a promise of redemption. It wasn't God, not an angel, just an ancient and unyielding force offering me a second life. I clung to it, my heart pounding with fear and hope. When my eyes opened, I stood in our row house, the scent of roast chicken in the air, the calendar reading October 10th, 1990, our first wedding anniversary. I was whole, my leg unscarred, my life unruined. But James stood in the doorway, Sarah behind him, her pregnant belly prominent. I'd been reborn, back to the moment it all began. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked loudly, each second a hammer against my skull. Laura Bennett, stood frozen in our Pittsburgh row house, my hands gripping the edge of the dining table, where the anniversary dinner I'd prepared sat untouched. James Carter, my husband, loomed in the doorway, his mill uniform streaked with soot, his face set with that familiar mix of guilt and resolve. Behind him stood Sarah Miller, her auburn hair framing a face that now seemed calculated, her green eyes gleaming with false vulnerability. Laura, James said, his voice sharp and impatient. "This is Sarah Miller. Tom Hayes died saving me. It's our duty to help her." My heart thundered, memories of my past life flooding back like a tidal wave, the couch, the frostbite, the stolen promotion, the crushed leg, the painkillers. I saw it all, every sacrifice, every betrayal, every moment I'd let them take from me. The warmth of that mysterious voice echoed in my mind. "You deserve another chance." This was my chance to rewrite the story. My nails dug into the table's wood, grounding me in this reborn moment. I wouldn't be their pawn again. James barked Laura help her settle in, his tone thick with irritation when I didn't move. Sarah stepped forward, her hands clasped over her belly, her voice a practiced whisper. Please, Laura, don't be mad. I don't want to be a burden. Her words were soft, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the subtle performance designed to sway anyone watching. Neighbors had already gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion, their murmurs floating through the open door. Poor thing, pregnant and widowed. James is a saint for this. I straightened my gaze, locking onto James. I said, "This is your debt, James," my voice cold and steady, not mine. The words felt like a blade, sharp and liberating. James's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "Laura, what the hell's gotten into you?" he snapped, dropping Sarah's duffel bag with a thud. "Tom died for me. We owe him everything." The neighbors' whispers grew louder, their eyes judging me as heartless, but I didn't flinch. In my past life, I'd crumbled under their gaze, let their opinions chain me to Sarah's needs. Not this time. Sarah stepped closer, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears. "Laura, please, I'm so sorry," she said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Tom gave his life for James. I need a place to stay." Her performance was flawless, her trembling lips and quivering shoulders painting her as the perfect victim. But I saw through it now, the calculated tilt of her head, the way her tears appeared on cue. I let out a cold laugh, the sound startling even me. "If you want to play the martyr, Sarah, do it elsewhere. There's no room here." The hallway erupted in gasps. "She's kicking out a pregnant widow," one neighbor muttered. "That's low even for her." James's face flushed with anger, his fists clenching. "Laura, you're humiliating me in front of everyone," he hissed. "Where's your decency?" I stepped forward, my voice unwavering. "Decency. You brought a stranger into our home without asking. If you want to repay Tom, do it yourself. Please don't drag me into your guilt." James's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe I'd spoken back. Sarah's tears faltered, her mask slipping for a split second before she recovered, dabbing her eyes. She whispered, "I didn't mean to cause trouble," but her words rang hollow. I turned to the neighbors, their judgmental stares burning into me. I said, "Go ahead, think what you want." My voice rising, "This is my home and I'm done being a doormat." James grabbed Sarah's bag, his face a storm of rage. "Fine, Laura. You'll regret this," he spat, ushering Sarah out. "Come on, Sarah, we'll stay at the Mills guest house." They left the door slamming behind them, and the neighbors' whispers followed. "She's throwing away a good man. She'll be sorry when she's alone." I sank to the floor, my back against the door, my hands trembling. Tears came hot and unstoppable, but they weren't just grief. They were relief, anger, and a fierce resolve. In my past life, I'd let their pity and James's guilt consume me. This time, I'd fight. Alone in the quiet house, I traced my fingers over the photo of James and me at our wedding, now a bitter reminder of a love turned sour. But another image flashed in my mind. My father, John Bennett, his hands steady as he taught me to read blueprints, his voice firm. "You're stronger than you know, Laura." I clutched that memory, letting it anchor me. The mysterious force that had reborn me hadn't explained itself, but its gift was clear, a chance to reclaim my life. I wiped my tears, stood, and faced the empty room. This was only the beginning, and I was ready. The Pittsburgh dawn broke gray and heavy, the steel mill's smokestacks casting long shadows over our row house street. Inside, the air felt stale, thick with the echoes of last night's confrontation. Laura Bennett stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a coffee mug with more force than necessary, my hands still trembling from the memory of slamming the door on James Carter and Sarah Miller. My reborn resolve burned bright, but the weight of the neighbors' whispers pressed against me like the February cold seeping through the windows. I'd told James to take his guilt and Sarah's tears elsewhere, but the cost of my defiance was becoming clear. Outside the row house hallway buzzed with judgment. Mrs. Callahan, our nosy neighbor with curlers perpetually in her hair, leaned against her doorframe, her voice carrying through the thin walls, and kicking out a pregnant widow Laura's got no heart turning away the wife of the man who saved her husband. Mr. Dorsey, who ran the corner store, chimed in his tone, dripping with pity for Sarah. Poor girl, all alone, and James trying so hard to do right by her. Their words stung, each one a needle pricking the confidence I'd mustered. In my past life, I'd let their gossip silence me, let it convince me I was wrong to feel betrayed. Not this time. At the steel mill, the break room was no better. My coworkers, once friendly, now avoided my gaze or whispered behind their coffee cups. Laura's too proud one said loud enough for me to hear, "James is a saint for taking in Tom's widow, and she's spitting in his face." I kept my head down, focusing on my quality control reports, but the isolation was suffocating. I remembered my father, John Bennett, whose engineering genius had earned him respect in these same halls. He'd faced skepticism as a young Irish American breaking into the mill's old boys' club, yet he'd never bowed. "You don't need their approval, Laura," he'd told me once, his blue eyes steady. "You need your own." I clung to that memory, but doubt crept in a cold whisper, asking if I'd pushed James too far. James had moved Sarah to the mill's guest house, a squat brick building near the plant's entrance, but his absence from our home didn't ease the tension. He'd stop by to grab clothes or papers, his eyes avoiding mine, his voice clipped. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Laura," he said one morning, stuffing a shirt into his bag. "Sarah's got no one. You used to care about people." His words cut deep, stirring memories of our early days' picnics by the Monongahela River, his hand warm in mine, promising forever. Had I misjudged him? Was I the selfish one, refusing to help a widow? I shook my head, banishing the thought. My past life had shown me where his duty led. My leg crushed my dreams, stolen my life in ruins. Alone in the row house each night, I sat on the couch, my makeshift bed, and traced the edges of my father's Purple Heart medal still safe in its frame. It was a relic of his courage, awarded after he'd redesigned a faulty valve system that saved dozens of lives during a gas leak in '73. The medal was my anchor, a reminder of who I was before James and Sarah reshaped me into someone I didn't recognize. But even that anchor couldn't stop the loneliness from creeping in. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment I'd stood up to James. The mysterious force that had reborn me, its voice a faint echo in my mind, had given me this chance, but it hadn't warned me how heavy defiance would feel. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not just for the betrayal, but for the woman I'd been so eager to please, so quick to sacrifice. One evening, as I walked home from the mill, snow crunching under my boots, I passed the diner where locals gathered. Through the fogged-up window, I saw Sarah, her pregnant belly, prominent, sipping coffee with a group of mill wives. Her soft laughter carried her face lit with a warmth I'd never seen in our house. She was winning them over, spinning her tale of woe. I stood frozen, the cold biting my fingers, and realized this was her game to paint me as the villain while she played the saint. My resolve hardened. I wouldn't let her narrative define me. I turned away, my breath visible in the frigid air, and vowed to fight for my place in the mill and my own life. Spring crept into Pittsburgh, the snow giving way to muddy streets and the faint green of budding trees. But in our row house, the chill lingered, reflecting the growing divide between me, Laura Bennett, and my husband, James Carter. A week after I'd banished him and Sarah Miller to the mill's guest house, James returned, his boots heavy on the creaking floorboards. He held a paper bag. His smile strained a shadow of the charm that had once melted my heart. "Laura," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I got something for you, a peace offering." I stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, wary of his sudden warmth. The memory of my past life, his betrayals, my crushed leg, the stolen compensation flashed like a warning. James opened the bag and pulled out a wool scarf, its edges frayed, a smear of pink lipstick staining the blue fabric. "Sarah picked it out," he said, his tone almost proud. "She thought the color didn't suit her, but it's perfect for you." My stomach churned. The scarf wasn't a gift, but a discard, a symbol of how little he valued me. Sarah's lipstick mark was a taunt, as if she'd claimed my place and left me her scraps. I stared at the scarf, my hands trembling with rage and humiliation. In my past life, I'd have accepted it, smiled through the insult, desperate to keep the peace. But the reborn Laura, forged in the fire of that mysterious voice's promise, wouldn't bend. "You think I'm your trash can?" I snapped, snatching the scarf and throwing it to the floor. The fabric landed with a soft thud, the lipstick stain glaring at me. James's smile froze, his brows furrowing. "Laura, that's a good scarf," he said, his voice rising. "Do you know how hard it was to get you're being ungrateful?" "Ungrateful," I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You bring me Sarah's leftovers and call it a gift. You're insulting me, James." His face flushed red, his fists clenching. He shouted Sarah offered her favorite scarf out of kindness, and you're throwing it back in her face. She's the widow of the man who saved my life. His words echoed the guilt he'd wielded like a weapon in my past life, but now they only fueled my anger. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady, "and don't come back with her garbage." James's eyes widened, a flicker of shock breaking through his anger. He grabbed the scarf, his knuckles white, and stormed out the door, slamming so hard the walls rattled. I sank onto the couch, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I closed my eyes, and memories of my past life surged Sarah's tearful performances, James's growing distance, the way they'd stripped me of everything. But this time I'd fought back. The victory was small, but it was mine. The break room buzzed with fresh gossip at the mill the next day. Laura threw away a gift from that poor widow, a welder muttered, shaking his head. She's got no shame. Another coworker, a woman who'd once shared coffee with me, turned away when I entered. I gripped my clipboard, my father's voice echoing, "You're stronger than you know." John Bennett had faced worse strikes, layoffs, prejudice, and never let it break him. I wouldn't either. But the isolation stung, a reminder of how easily Sarah's act could sway others. That evening, I sat with my father's Purple Heart medal, its weight grounding me. I'd nearly lost it in my past life, stolen by Sarah's greed, but it was still in its frame. It was more than a medal. It was my father's legacy, proof that skill and courage could triumph over adversity. I traced its edges, my resolve hardening. James and Sarah thought they could guilt me into submission, but they didn't know the Laura I'd become. The mysterious force that had reborn me hadn't just given me a second chance, it had awakened a fire I'd forgotten I had. I set the medal down, my eyes fixed on the future. They'd underestimated me, and they'd pay for it. Spring's tentative warmth had settled over Pittsburgh, the steel mill's smokestacks puffing gray clouds against a sky streaked with pink. Inside our row house, the air was heavy with the aftermath of my defiance, the memory of throwing James Carter's tainted scarf to the floor still burning in my chest. Laura Bennett, had reclaimed a piece of myself by rejecting his and Sarah Miller's manipulations. But the cost was a solitude that clung like damp rot. The neighbors' whispers followed me, heartless, ungrateful, and at the mill, coworkers turned away, their eyes cold with judgment. Yet I held fast to the mysterious force that had reborn me, its whispered promise. You deserve another chance, a beacon in the dark. Each night I sat on the lumpy couch that had become my bed, my fingers tracing the frame of my father's Purple Heart medal, a relic of his heroism at the mill. John Bennett was a lead engineer redesigning a faulty valve system in 1973, which saved dozens from a gas leak explosion. The cool and heavy metal was more than metal, it was his legacy, a reminder of the strength he'd passed to me. You're more rigid than the toughest steel, Laura, he'd said, his Irish lilt warm with pride. But that legacy felt fragile, now threatened by the life I'd let James and Sarah unravel in my past existence. One evening, as I packed clothes into a suitcase preparing for the possibility of leaving James for good, I noticed the frame on the side table was askew. My heart stopped. The Purple Heart was gone, its velvet slot empty. Panic surged, a cold wave that stole my breath. That medal was my father's final gift, the only piece of him I had left after he died in a mill accident when I was 16. I tore through the house, checking drawers, cabinets, even under the couch, my hands shaking as memories of my past life flashed Sarah's greedy fingers, her whispered questions about pawn shops overheard at the mill. No, she wouldn't dare. But doubt gnawed at me. In my past life, Sarah had taken everything, my job, husband, and dignity. The medal had been stolen and then sold for a pittance to fund her comforts. I clutched the empty frame, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and grief. My father's voice echoed, "Stand up for what's yours, Laura." I couldn't let her take this, not again. I grabbed my coat, the spring air sharp against my skin, and headed to the mill's guest house, where James and Sarah had settled. The streets were slick with recent rain, the neon glow of a diner casting reflections in puddles as I passed, my resolve hardening with each step. The guest house was a squat brick building, its windows dim under the mill's looming shadow. I knocked my knuckles sharp against the door, but no one answered. The lock was loose, a common flaw in the mill's aging facilities, and I pushed inside, my heart pounding. Sarah's room was sparse, a cot, a suitcase, and folded clothes. I rifled through her belongings, guilt warring with necessity, until my fingers brushed something hard in the lining of a brown paper bag. I pulled it out, my father's Purple Heart, its purple ribbon faded but intact. After a pawn shop receipt dated yesterday, the valuation slip listed $200, a fraction of its worth to me. I clutched the metal, tears burning my eyes. This wasn't just theft. It was a violation, a strike at my father's memory. In my past life, I'd let Sarah's tears and James's guilt silence me, but not now. The mysterious force that had brought me back hadn't just given me a second chance. It had ignited a fire to reclaim what was mine. I slipped the medal into my pocket, the receipt crumpled in my fist, and turned to leave. Footsteps echoed in the hall, and I froze, my pulse racing as the door creaked open. The guest house room felt suffocating, the air thick with the scent of cheap perfume and mildew. Laura Bennett, stood clutching my father's stolen Purple Heart the pawn shop receipt, a damning weight in my hand. The door swung open and Sarah Miller burst in, her auburn hair disheveled, her green eyes widening as they locked on the metal. "Laura, what are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice high and panicked. A crowd of mill workers and guest house residents gathered in the hallway, drawn by her cry, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. I held up the metal, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Taking back what belongs to my father." Sarah's face paled, her hands fluttering to her belly, now heavy with her unborn child. "It's a misunderstanding," she stammered, her eyes darting to the crowd. "I was looking at it. I meant to return it when you were calmer." Her voice trembled, a practiced act I'd seen too many times in my past life. But now I saw the calculation behind her tears, the way she angled herself to win the crowd's sympathy. The hallway buzzed with murmurs. "She's accusing a pregnant widow," one worker whispered. "That's cold." But others hesitated, their eyes flicking to the receipt in my hand. I held it up, the paper shaking slightly. "This says you tried to sell it," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "My father's Purple Heart earned saving lives at this mill is valued at $200, like it's nothing." The crowd's whispers shifted, doubt creeping into their faces. Sarah's tears came faster, her shoulders quivering. "I was curious, that's all," she said. "James told me to keep it safe. He said you've been unstable." James pushed through the crowd, his mill uniform rumpled, his face darkening as he saw the metal. "Laura, what the hell are you doing in her room?" He snapped, his voice thick with anger. "You're making a scene over a trinket, a trinket." The word hit like a slap, dismissing my father's legacy as worthless. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on his. "This is my family's honor," I said, each word deliberate. "Sarah stole it, and you're defending her. What else have you let her take, James?" His jaw tightened, but his gaze flickered, betraying a hint of guilt. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, softer now, turning to Sarah. "Don't cry, Sarah. It's not good for the baby." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch too familiar, and a sharp pain pierced my chest. In my past life, I'd ignored those touches, convinced myself they were innocent. Now I saw the truth, a bond that went beyond duty and cost me everything. The crowd's murmurs grew, some still siding with Sarah, others starting to question. "Maybe Laura's got a point," a young welder muttered, eyeing the receipt. I turned to the crowd, my voice rising. "This medal was my father's, John Bennett's, who saved lives in '73. It's not a trinket, and it's not Sarah's to take." I held the Purple Heart high, its ribbon catching the dim light. "If you think I'm wrong to protect it, then you don't know what family means." A few nodded, their faces softening, while others looked away uncomfortable. Sarah's sobs grew louder, but they felt hollow, now her act cracking under scrutiny. James stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Laura, let's talk about this at home. You're embarrassing us all." I laughed, cold and sharp. "Embarrassing you?" "You've embarrassed yourself," James, choosing her over me, over my father's memory. I pocketed the medal, my resolve unyielding. "I'm done letting you two rewrite my story." I pushed past him, the crowd parting their whispers, a mix of awe and unease. As I stepped into the cool spring air, the medal's weight in my pocket felt like armor. My father's legacy was safe, and so was my future. Back at the row house, I set the medal in its frame, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. The mysterious force that had reborn me hadn't just given me a chance to undo my past, it had shown me my strength. I thought of my father, his steady hands guiding me through blueprints, his voice urging me to fight. The mill's technical supervisor position soon opened, tied to his legacy. In my past life, James had given it to Sarah, sending me to the furnace room where my leg was crushed. This time I'd fight for it, for him, for myself. The battle was far from over, but I was ready. The Pittsburgh summer of 1991 hung heavy with humidity, the steel mill's furnaces casting a relentless heat that seeped into every corner of the city. Inside our row house, Laura Bennett, sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of technical manuals and handwritten notes. The Purple Heart medal, safely returned to its frame after Sarah Miller's theft, gleamed under the lamplight, a silent reminder of my father's legacy. John Bennett's engineering genius had saved lives at this mill, and now, with the technical supervisor position opening, I was determined to honor him by claiming it. In my past life, James Carter had handed this role to Sarah, condemning me to the furnace room where my leg was crushed. This time, I'd fight for what was mine. The mill's selection process was rigorous: a written proposal, a pre-evaluation presentation, and a final vote by the leadership. I'd spent weeks crafting a safety system proposal to optimize gas detection protocols, drawing on my father's old blueprints and quality control experience. The work was grueling, but it felt like a lifeline, a way to reclaim the dreams James and Sarah had stolen. Each night I pored over equations, my eyes burning, my coffee growing cold. My father's voice echoed, "You're more rigid than the toughest steel, Laura." I clung to it, pushing through exhaustion. Now living at the mill's guest house with Sarah, James hadn't softened since our confrontation over the metal. He'd corner me at the mill, his voice low and sharp. "Laura, drop the supervisor application," he said one day in the break room, his eyes glinting with unease. "Sarah needs this job. She's a widow pregnant with no skills. You've got plenty of time to shine." I stared at him, the man I'd once loved, now a stranger wielding guilt like a weapon. "You want to pay your debt with my future," I replied, my voice steady. "No, James. This is my father's legacy, and I'm earning it." His face darkened, but he said nothing, storming off with a slam of the break room door. I knew he wouldn't stop there. James was deputy section chief, with enough pull to tilt the scales. Days before the pre-evaluation, I caught him lingering near my desk, his hands too close to my proposal draft. The next morning, I found my notes soaked in coffee, the pages ruined. "Accident," James muttered, not meeting my eyes. Fury surged, but I remembered my past life. His sabotage had crushed me, then sending me to despair. Not now. I stayed up all night rewriting every page. My hands were cramped, but my resolve was unbroken. The deadline was moved up, unexpectedly announced by Sarah, who smiled sweetly as she delivered the news. "Rules change, Laura," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I rushed to James's office, my new draft clutched tight. He didn't look up from his paperwork. "Too late," he said coolly. "Submissions closed yesterday." My jaw clenched, but I refused to beg. I turned to the mill's director, a grizzled veteran named Tom Sullivan who'd known my father. I said, "Please check the timestamp on my draft," handing him a backup I'd saved. He nodded, his eyes kind but guarded, promising to review it. I was scheduled last at the pre-evaluation meeting after a dozen other candidates had droned on, exhausting the panel's patience. I stood at the front of the conference room, my heart pounding, my proposal projected on a flickering screen. "My system cuts gas leak detection time by 30%. I began, my voice clear despite the fatigue. But James interrupted, glancing at his watch. "It's late, Laura. We'll review your materials later." The dismissal stung, but I saw a flicker of respect in Sullivan's eyes, a nod to my father's memory. I sat down, my hands trembling, knowing I'd done my best. That night, alone in the row house, I sat with the Purple Heart, its weight grounding me. The mysterious force that had reborn me hadn't promised an easy path, but had given me this chance to fight. I thought of my father, his steady hands guiding me through blueprints, his belief in my strength. James and Sarah thought they could break me again, but didn't know the fire they'd ignited. The final selection was days away, and I wasn't done yet. The mill's conference hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the faint smell of machine oil. It was the day of the technical supervisor selection, and I, Laura Bennett, stood at the back, my heart beating in my chest. The Purple Heart medal tucked in my pocket was a talisman of my father's legacy, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard. John Bennett had saved lives with his engineering, and I'd poured my soul into a safety system proposal to honor him. In my past life, James Carter had given this role to Sarah Miller, sending me to the furnace room where my life was shattered. Today, I'd rewrite that ending. The mill director, Tom Sullivan, took the stage, his voice gravelly but commanding. After a thorough evaluation, he said, "We've selected the new technical supervisors, holding a list approved by city officials." The room hushed, every worker leaning forward. In quality control, Mark Reynolds. In maintenance, Lisa Carter. My breath caught as he continued. In safety systems, Laura Bennett. My name echoed like a thunderclap, and relief and pride surged. I'd done it. I'd earned my father's legacy. But James shot to his feet, his face stormy. "Director, there's a mistake," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The safety systems role was for Sarah Miller. I nominated her." Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers buzzing like static. "He's backing the widow over his own wife," someone muttered. "Something's going on there," another said, eyeing James and Sarah, who sat near the front, her pregnant belly prominent. My stomach twisted, the sting of betrayal sharp, but I held my ground, my hand tightening around the metal. Before Sullivan could respond, a new voice cut in, calm but authoritative. Deputy Director Robert Klein, a lean man in a gray suit, stepped forward. Klein had worked with my father in the 70s, admiring his ingenuity during the gas leak crisis. Are you questioning the city's decision? Carter Klein asked, his gaze sharp. James's arrogance faltered, his face paling. Laura's proposal for gas detection is groundbreaking. Klein continued, his voice steady. It could save lives across Pittsburgh's mills. You, however, pushed for someone with no technical expertise. That's not leadership, it's favoritism. The room fell silent, the weight of Klein's words sinking in. Sarah's head bowed, her earlier smugness gone, her eyes wide with fear. James's lips trembled, but no words came. I felt a fierce relief, years of suppression dissolving. In my past life, I'd been silenced, my work ignored. Now my voice was heard. Klein turned to me, his eyes warm. Laura, your father would be proud. You're carrying his torch. My nose stung, tears threatening, but I nodded. Thank you, sir. The crowd stirred, some whispering in awe, others glancing at James contemptuously. I seized the moment, stepping forward, my voice ringing clear. James Carter, our values don't align. I want a divorce. The hall gasped, a few workers exchanging shocked looks. James's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. Laura, you're making a scene, he hissed. We'll talk at home. I laughed, cold and certain. There's nothing to talk about. I'm done. Klein's mouth curved into a faint, approving smile, as if he saw my father's fire in me. The meeting ended in a tense hush, workers filing out their whispers, now laced with gossip about James and Sarah. Back at the row house, James followed, his voice desperate. Laura, please, I'll do better, he said, dropping to one knee, mimicking Sarah's theatrics. I pulled out divorce papers I'd prepared, my hands steady. We split the assets evenly, but the house is mine. It was my father's. His face twisted, but he sighed, his mask of charm shattering. You'll regret this, he muttered, but his threat was hollow. I stood at the window, the Purple Heart back in its frame, the city's lights flickering beyond. The mysterious force that had reborn me had led me to this moment of triumph. My father's legacy was secure, and so was my future. James and Sarah had tried to break me, but I'd risen stronger. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to choose for the first time. The Pittsburgh summer of 1991 faded into memory as Laura Bennett stood at the threshold of a new life. The row house, once my prison, was now mine alone, secured in the divorce from James Carter. The Purple Heart medal, my father's legacy, sat proudly in its frame, symbolizing the strength I'd reclaimed. After winning the technical supervisor role at the steel mill, I'd expected joy, but a strange emptiness lingered. With its clanging furnaces and whispered judgments, the mill felt like a chapter I'd outgrown. Deputy Director Robert Klein, who'd championed my proposal, called one evening, his voice warm but firm. Laura, you've got your father's fire, he said, recalling John Bennett's heroics in the 70s. But don't let Pittsburgh cage you. The world's changing tech's the future. Study it, invest in it. His words struck a chord. My father had always pushed boundaries, redesigning systems to save lives. I wanted to honor that, not just in the mill, but beyond it. So I resigned, trading Pittsburgh's soot for Silicon Valley's promise. In September 1991, I arrived in San Jose, the heart of America's tech boom, with a suitcase and a heart still scarred but healing. I worked as an assembly line worker at a semiconductor plant. The work was repetitive but grounding. The cleanroom suits and humming machinery were a far cry from the mill's grit, yet they steadied me. Each night in a cramped dorm shared with other workers, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my past lift. The mysterious force that had reborn me hadn't spoken again, but its gift was clear freedom to choose my path. I dove into learning, devouring books on coding and tech markets in the dorm's dim light. Klein's advice echoed, urging me to watch Silicon Valley's startup scene. I invested my modest savings in a fledgling tech stock, my palms sweaty as I signed the papers. 3 months later, the stock quadrupled, my first taste of financial freedom. Emboldened, I began planning a startup, dreaming of building something lasting like my father had. But the scars of betrayal lingered, making me wary of trust. I'd lost so much to James and Sarah Miller, my home dreams and faith in love. Could I open my heart again? One afternoon, while browsing an electronics market, I froze. A familiar face stood among the stalls, his sandy hair catching the California sun. Ethan Brooks, my childhood friend from Pittsburgh, who'd shared dreams of adventure under the Allegheny stars. Laura Bennett, he said, his blue eyes wide with disbelief. We found a nearby coffee shop, its walls lined with tech posters, and caught up. Ethan, a skilled engineer who'd left the mill after a layoff, had come to Silicon Valley to chase innovation. We said we'd take on the world, remember? he said, his smile warm, stirring memories of simpler times. When I shared my startup idea, a small electronics firm focused on safety sensors, Ethan's eyes lit up. I've got the technical know-how, he said, leaning forward. You've got the vision. We'd be unstoppable. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I felt hope for the first time in years. We shook hands, partners in a dream, and rented a rundown warehouse filled with secondhand equipment. Days stretched into nights as we worked soldering circuits and drafting plans, our laughter filling the space. Ethan's steady presence, handing me coffee, checking my calculations, thawed the ice around my heart. One night, under Silicon Valley's starlit sky, Ethan walked me back to the dorm, his hand brushing mine. Laura, he said, his voice soft but clear. Can I pursue you? My breath caught fear, warring with longing. In my past life, love had betrayed me, but Ethan's eyes held truth. I took his hand, squeezing it tightly, my answer unspoken but certain. The moon glowed above, and for the first time I believed happiness might last. Our startup grew, orders trickling in, and so did our bond, built on shared dreams and quiet moments. The Purple Heart now on my desk reminded me of my father's strength and mine. Silicon Valley pulsed with energy, its neon-lit offices and bustling markets a world away from Pittsburgh's gray smokestacks. By 1995, Laura Bennett stood at the helm of a thriving electronics startup, our safety sensors in demand across tech giants. The warehouse Ethan Brooks and I had started with was now a sleek facility. Our team had grown from 2 to 30. The Purple Heart medal, my father's legacy, sat on my office desk, its purple ribbon a quiet anchor. Each night Ethan walked me home, his hand warm in mine, our love, a steady flame that had healed the scars of my past. Yet a lingering fear remained, a whisper that happiness could be snatched away, just as it had been in my past life. One evening, a new worker from Pittsburgh joined our team, his stories of the old mill sparking memories. You got out just in time, Laura, he said, shaking his head. The mill's failing coal reserves are gone, and management's a mess. They've turned it into a storage lot. Your ex, James Carter, is a security guard there, barely scraping by. I nodded, my face calm, but a flicker of emotion stirred. And Sarah Miller, he continued, she ran off with the mill's accountant, taking her kid. Turns out the boy wasn't even Tom Hayes's. She was always in trouble, that one. The news hit like a distant echo. His own choices break James, and her deceit undoes Sarah. I felt no joy, only a quiet release. In my past life, their betrayal had crushed me. Now their downfall was their own. That night, Ethan sensed my mood, his hand gentle on my shoulder. You okay? He asked. I nodded, leaning into him, the weight of Pittsburgh fading under Silicon Valley's stars. Months later, I saw Sarah on a business trip to San Francisco. She stood under a flickering streetlight, her once auburn hair dyed a garish blonde, her face caked with makeup that couldn't hide the years. Her tight dress strained over a bloated figure, and her eyes darted nervously as she offered services to passers-by. A man approached their exchange brief before they slipped into an alley. A scream followed, and I rushed closer, peering into the shadows. The man gripped Sarah's throat, cursing her as she pleaded, I need to eat! He shoved her down, tossing coins that struck her face, leaving a bloody scratch. A young man with bleached hair and knockoff boots staggered, in his eyes vicious. How much today, Mom? He barked, snatching her pouch. Sarah's son, raised in chaos, is now a thug demanding her earnings. Her eyes met mine, recognition flashing dark bitter. Her lips parted, but no words came. I turned away, my heart heavy with pity, not vengeance. Sarah's choices had led her here just as mine had led me to freedom. Years later, in 1998, after a company banquet, I stood outside our San Jose office, the Purple Heart, in my pocket, its weight a comfort. A slouched figure approached, his graying hair tousled by the wind. Laura James Carter, said, his voice hoarse, his eyes hollow. You've changed. So successful, so beautiful. I looked at him coldly, the man who'd traded my love for Sarah's lies. What do you want, James? He shuffled his hands, trembling. I miss you. I was wrong, blinded by Sarah's act. I love you, always have. His words were a slap, stirring anger and pity. You chose her? I said, my voice flat. You slept with her before our divorce, didn't you? She told me. His face drained of color, his silence a confession. You're only sorry because you lost everything. Ethan approached, his presence steady. Who's this? He asked. No one, I replied, taking his arm, just a ghost. We walked away, James's pleas fading behind us. 3 months later, word came from Pittsburgh. James had died of cancer alone. My heart stayed still, the pain of his betrayal long buried. The mysterious force that had reborn me had given me more than a second chance, it had shown me my worth. At our simple wedding, Ethan's eyes held truth, our vows sealed with sincerity. The purple heart sat on our table, a symbol of my father's legacy and my redemption. As Silicon Valley's breeze carried the scent of eucalyptus, I let go of the past, grateful for my chosen life.